In the frozen no-man's land bordering the Arizona Territory, a poor family of 3 fought to stay alive against a winter that showed no mercy. 19-year-old Sarah Vance braved the icy trail each day to keep their last milk cow alive, never knowing a predator was watching her from the shadows. When Vance, the vulture, Kincaid, set his sights on her, the terror that followed nearly shattered her family forever. Watch till the end, partner, to uncover how Sarah sacrificed everything to save her family, and how a mysterious millionaire stepped into her life when all hope seemed lost. Tell us where you're watching from, and join our Sleep West family. Now saddle up, we're riding into the story.
In the frozen, unforgiving expanse bordering the Arizona Territory, a place the locals bitterly called Dustfall Divide, a family of 3 struggled for survival. Their existence was tethered to a few dairy cows and the thin hope they could endure the bitter winter. Jeb Vance, the father, a man whose hands were permanently cracked by labor and cold. Martha, the mother whose face held the geography of worry, and their daughter, 19-year-old Sarah Vance. They occupied a weathered shack at the edge of the Bitter Creek settlement, surviving by selling raw milk and butter in town, a task made treacherous by the ice. Sarah was the axis of their small universe, her strength surprising given her delicate frame. Every afternoon she walked the wind-whipped track, leading their soul-producing heifer, Bess, back from the sparse grazing patch near the meager frozen creek, a routine etched into the very rhythm of their survival. One afternoon, as Sarah steered Bess past the abandoned silver mine, the sky heavy with the promise of more snow, she was spotted, not by a neighbor, but by a predator. Vance, the vulture Kincaid, the self-proclaimed baron of the local Badlands, sat perched on his horse, his eyes glinting like broken glass under the brim of his black hat, his breath steaming white in the Arctic air. Kincaid led a notorious gang, known less for robbery and more for coercion and destruction. He watched the young woman, her quiet grace, the way she kept her shoulders straight despite the hardship, and marked her as his own. He tracked her shadow back to the Vance cabin, a dilapidated structure whose thin walls offered little defense against the howling wind. The very next morning, Kincaid rode up, not alone but with 2 hulking men, whose massive forms blocked the meager winter light from the cabin door. "Jeb Vance," Kincaid drawled, spitting a stream of brown liquid into the hard-packed snow. "We have a business proposal for you." Jeb stepped out, Martha clinging to the doorframe, Sarah hovering behind them, bundled in threadbare wool. "We have no business with men like you, Kincaid. Be gone." The vulture smiled, a terrifying show of yellowed teeth. "It's about your girl, Sarah. I've taken a liking to her. Sell her to me. You name your price, within reason. I'll give you enough silver to double your herd, buy yourself proper land, and guarantee you'll never see me or my men on your property again. It's a clean slate, Vance, a fresh start for the winter that's going to swallow you whole." Jeb felt a cold dread deeper than the frost in the ground, but his voice was steel. "We may be poor enough to eat dirt, Kincaid, but we are not poor enough to sell our kin. We will freeze with dignity before we accept your filthy proposition." Kincaid's smile vanished, replaced by a promise of violence. "You'll regret that. I have patience, Vance, but bodies freeze quickly out here, and so does kindness." For 3 agonizing days, the threats escalated. Kincaid never forced his way in, but his men would patrol the property, shouting obscenities, destroying fencing, and deliberately breaking the ice over their small water source. The psychological siege was crippling the Vances. They couldn't leave, couldn't fight, and couldn't rest, chilled to the bone even inside their shack. On the 4th afternoon, the yelling reached a fever pitch, carried by a sharp icy gust. Kincaid, infuriated by Jeb's stubborn refusal, was screaming outside the cabin walls about taming the girl and leaving them to freeze. It was at that moment a large unornamented black carriage, pulled by a team of matching black stallions, rolled silently down the frozen road, crushing the thin layer of fresh powder. At the reins was the most powerful man in the territory, the owner of the vast Ironwood estate, Kit Carson. Carson was an anomaly. Not a self-made gold prospector, nor a brute, but a man of impeccable tailored wool, quiet demeanor, and a reputation for cold, calculated success. He He owned half the county's shipping routes and controlled the water rights. When Kit Carson spoke, the banks listened. He reined in his team, creating a striking contrast to the ragged chaos of Kincaid's gang. He simply sat there, wrapped in a heavy coat of dark shearling, his eyes the color of a winter sky, observing the scene. Kincaid, recognizing the carriage, immediately faltered. Crossing the Vances was one thing. Crossing Kit Carson was a guarantee of ruin. "This ain't your business, Carson," Kincaid muttered, his bravado instantly deflating. "The volume suggests otherwise, and I dislike loud noises in the cold," Kit Carson replied, his voice soft but carrying the weight of granite. He didn't look at Kincaid, but at the bruised, worn faces peering from the cabin door. "Gather your men, Kincaid. The air here is turning stale." Seeing Carson's silent authority, Kincaid barked an order to his men and retreated, disappearing across the frozen divide in a cloud of vengeful dust. Kit Carson didn't dismount. He looked at the Vances with an expression of detached contemplation. "I invite you to the Ironwood tomorrow morning. Come alone, and wear your warmest clothes. We have a matter of territory to discuss." Then, without waiting for an answer, he urged his carriage forward. The next day, the Vances rode through a desolate, snow-covered landscape and were ushered into the Ironwood estate, a sprawling complex that felt less like a ranch and more like a fortress disguised as a manor, a bastion of warmth against the freezing world. They sat in a drawing room that smelled of polished wood, expensive tobacco, and the comforting scent of a large, roaring stone fireplace. Kit Carson offered them coffee, the first true luxury Sarah had ever tasted, hot and rich against the biting cold they had carried in, and got straight to the point. "I overheard Kincaid's demands," Carson stated, folding his hands. "He is a disease. He will not stop. He will escalate until you submit or he destroys you. I can remove him, but the moment I turn my back, another coyote will come calling." He paused, studying them. "I have a standing arrangement with the local constabulary and the territorial sheriff. We are currently building a solid case against Kincaid for crimes far more severe than harassment. But that takes time you don't have, particularly with the coming deep freeze." "What are you proposing, Mr. Carson?" Jeb asked, pulling closer to the fire. "I have a solution, and perhaps it is unconventional. I am a man of considerable influence and security. I also have an unfortunate reputation for being unreachable, aloof, and utterly uninterested in companionship. This has led to an endless parade of ill-suited marriage proposals from every ambitious family, from here to Tucson. All of which I reject," he explained, without a hint of irony. He turned his full attention to Sarah, and she felt the unnerving intensity of his gaze. "Here is my advice," Carson continued, choosing his words with deliberate care. "I can marry your daughter immediately. I will provide her with absolute security, protection, and the respect due to the mistress of the Ironwood. No man, least of all Vance Kincaid, will dare threaten my wife. She will be beyond his reach, legally and physically. She will receive the best education and material comfort I can provide." He fixed his gaze on Jeb. "In return, I require nothing but her name and her presence. I ask you to consider the choice between a lingering violent persecution and the threat of exposure, or immediate, unassailable security here, out of the snow. I do not require a romantic attachment, nor do I plan to initiate one. I require a partner in reputation only." Jeb was stunned into silence. He swallowed hard. "Give us until sundown, Mr. Carson. We must speak to our girl." Back in the confines of their dusty cabin, battling the chill creeping under the door, Martha was the first to speak. "Sarah, child, this is an answer to a prayer we didn't know how to ask. It's a shield from the wolves outside, and a roof that won't leak ice water. We would miss you, but we would know you were safe." Sarah, who had always viewed love and marriage as distant, impractical concepts, saw only pragmatism. "Father," she said, her voice clear and strong despite the weight of the decision, "Mr. Carson is offering me a way to protect you, and to protect this life we've built, however small. I will marry him. I have no reservation, if you and Mother agree it's the only path forward." By dusk, Jeb Vance was back at the Ironwood, shaking Kit Carson's hand. "We agree to your proposal, sir, on the condition that you treat her with the respect you promised." Kit Carson nodded once. "I give you my word. The marriage will take place tomorrow by the justice of the peace. Today I will clear your debts and legally transfer the title of the cabin and the land to Martha. You will be free of obligation." The news, predictable as a wildfire in dry brush, reached Vance Kincaid. His fury was a tangible thing. He saw Carson's move not as a charitable intervention, but as a deliberate provocation and a theft of his chosen prize. He rode to the ironwood with his entire posse, only to find the massive wrought iron gates guarded not by men with rifles, but by the clean-cut uniforms of the territorial sheriff's deputies, their coats heavy against the relentless wind. Kit Carson, anticipating the spectacle, stepped out onto the porch, a picture of calm authority in his thick wool coat. "Sheriff," he called out, nodding toward Kincaid, "I believe I have some additional evidence for you regarding that livestock theft and the border smuggling operation. Let's clean up this mess." Kincaid, realizing he had ridden straight into a trap, found himself quickly disarmed and arrested, his past crimes finally catching up to him, all thanks to the thorough, unseen groundwork laid by the meticulous Kit Carson. The trouble for the Vances was finally gone, hauled away into the bitter cold. Sarah Vance married Kit Carson in a brief, unceremonious ceremony, stepping into a life of staggering wealth she had never imagined. But the protection came with a price, a chilling emotional distance. Sarah, overwhelmed by the grand house, the servants, and the quiet power of her new husband, retreated into a shell. She was the mistress of the estate, yet she felt like a tenant. When Kit Carson was in the dining room, she hid in the conservatory. If she heard his boots on the stairs, she slipped downstairs. Her avoidance was not disdain, but deep, ingrained shyness, and the heavy guilt that she had only been chosen as a strategic move. Kit Carson watched this dynamic unfold with a patient silence that Sarah often mistook for indifference. He was a man accustomed to waiting for market shifts and seasons to change. He would not force a connection that was not yet ready to form. A week passed in this careful, awkward dance. Then one Sunday morning, Kit Carson was seated at the massive mahogany table, reading a ledger and sipping hot coffee, when the silence was broken. Sarah, driven by a simple need for a cup of tea and a moment near the morning sun that filtered through the pane, came down the sweeping staircase. She stopped dead when she saw him. He looked up, not startled, but merely acknowledging her. "Good morning, Mrs. Carson," he said, his voice measured. She found her tongue, her throat dry. "Gee, good morning, Mr. Carson." He placed the ledger aside. "Please, sit. The cook has prepared fresh apricot preserves. It's a day for warmth." That small mundane interaction was the turning point. Over the next few days, their conversations began to stretch beyond formalities. They spoke about the estate, the necessity of the coming snow fencing, and the difficulty of keeping the roads clear. Sarah discovered that behind his cold reputation, Kit Carson was immensely knowledgeable about the world, and possessed a dry wit that rarely surfaced. He in turn learned of her practical intelligence, and her deep love for the quiet life they had left behind. They were becoming comfortable, two strangers finding common ground in an arrangement born of necessity. Their unexpected marriage was the chief gossip of the Dustfall Divide, and soon, an invitation arrived. The annual Settlers' Social was to be held at the Central Village Hall, a gathering Kit Carson, with his aversion to public life, had always shunned. Sarah showed him the card. "They want us to attend. The whole settlement will be there." Kit Carson looked at the engraved card, and then at her. "We will not go. Your security is paramount, and my attendance only fuels speculation." Sarah took a deep breath, the shyness giving way to the spirit that had kept her family alive. "For how long, Kit? For how long must I live in your shadow, protected but unseen? I need to face them. I need them to see that I am not a prisoner, or a purchase." He searched her eyes, finding not fear but resolution, even as the blizzard raged outside the window. "Very well, Sarah, but I will be at your side." They arrived at the social instantly drawing every eye. The hall was packed with bundled figures, seeking respite from the weather. Kit Carson, a dark, silent force, stood behind Sarah as she navigated the room. But the villagers, fueled by rumors, were not kind. A group of women cornered her near the communal stove, their smiles brittle. One, the postmaster's wife, leaned in conspiratorially. "So, dear, we hear your father struck quite a deal. It's a comfort to know he made such a good life for you, even if it cost him the family dignity." The veiled accusation that she was sold stung Sarah more deeply than any threat from Kincaid. The humiliation was sudden and absolute. She looked at the circle of expectant, judging faces, and her spine straightened. "You misunderstand my family entirely," Sarah said, her voice steady and echoing in the sudden quiet of the small group. "My father refused to sell me. He faced death to protect me. I am standing here because my family refused to bow to a man who had no power but cruelty." She paused, looking directly at the postmaster's wife. "And I am here because Kit Carson chose to be my shield. He did not buy me. He offered me a vow. If you wish to speak about my past, speak about my father's honor, not his supposed greed. Your lack of charity in judging a family's desperation is a far greater failing than our poverty ever was." The entire cluster of gossipers fell silent, heads bowed in sudden shame. Sarah turned away, her heart pounding, and walked straight to her husband. She told him everything on the carriage ride home, the words pouring out in a frustrated torrent, the sneers, the whispers, the certainty of the villagers that she was nothing more than an expensive transaction. Kit Carson listened, his face hardening with a quiet, terrifying anger. He reached out, his hand covering hers, the first genuine touch they had shared outside of the marriage ritual. "This must end," he said, his voice low, a rumble of determination. "I should have done this sooner. They will see the full truth." The following Sunday afternoon, the bell of the small white church in Bitter Creek settlement rang, summoning all citizens. It wasn't for worship, but for a public assembly announced only hours prior by a swift messenger from the Ironwood estate. Kit Carson stood on the steps of the church, Sarah beside him, their presence a deliberate declaration of unity. The entire village gathered, bundled in thick coats, murmuring amongst themselves about the unexpected decree. Kit Carson waited until the last sound of the shuffling feet had died away. He addressed the crowd, his voice carrying clearly in the cool afternoon air. "People of Bitter Creek," he began, "I have heard the talk. It seems some of you believe, you understand the nature of my marriage to Sarah Vance." He took a slow step forward. "Let me be absolutely clear. The Vance family were indebted, struggling, and under siege by a criminal. Before I made my proposal, I legally settled every single cent they owed. I cleared their debts. I did this not as a payment, but as a gift to a man who stood up to a tyrant. I did not buy this woman. I did not purchase her. I have never paid a single penny for her hand or her name." He fixed his gaze on the collective faces of the settlement. "I chose her. I chose her for her dignity, her resilience, and the strength she showed when facing down the likes of Vance Kincaid. She is my wife, and she is here by her own consent and choice. Anyone who suggests otherwise slanders not only her, but the honor of the Vance family, and they slander me. That slander ends today." Sarah stepped forward, placing her hand firmly in the crook of his arm, a gesture of ownership and devotion that stunned the crowd. She lifted her chin, her eyes shining with newfound confidence. "He speaks the truth. My father gave me away for my protection, not for profit, and I chose him too. I chose Kit Carson to be my home." The silence that followed was total, heavier than the wind outside. Then, one by one, the villagers began to murmur apologies. The postmaster's wife was the first to speak aloud, her voice thick with remorse. "We are truly sorry, Mrs. Carson. We spoke out of ignorance and shame." Many lowered their heads, chastened by the public correction, and the undeniable nobility of Kit Carson's actions. The mysterious twist was finally revealed. The rancher had not been an opportunist acquiring property, but a principled protector clearing a path for a true partnership. Sarah Vance had not been sold, she had been selected, and she had chosen in return. The ironwood vow was sealed, not by a contract of silver, but by the weight of public truth, even as the snow fell around them.